We are 130 days out from Melbourne, and for 3 weeks we have lain in this sweltering calm. It is midnight, and I'll watch on deck until 4 a.m. I go out and sit on the hatch. A minute later, Jokey, our youngest apprentice, joins me for a chatter. Many are the hours we have sat thus and talked in the night watches. Though to be sure, it is Jokey who does the talking. I am content to smoke and listen, giving an occasional grunt at seasons to show that I am attentive. Jokey has been silent for some time, his head bent in meditation. Suddenly he looks up, evidently with the intention of making some remark. As he does so, I see his face stiffen with a nameless horror. He crouches back, his eyes staring past me at some unseen fear. Then his mouth opens. He gives forth a strangulated cry and topples backward off the hatch, striking his head against the deck. Fearing I know not what, I turn to look. Great heavens! Rising above the bulwarks, seen plainly in the bright moonlight, is a vast, slobbering mouth a fathom across. From the huge, dripping lips hang great tentacles. As I look, the thing comes further over the rail. It is rising, higher and higher. There are no eyes visible, only that fearful slobbering mouth set on the tremendous trunk-like neck, which, even as I watch, is curling inboard with the stealthy celerity of an enormous eel. Over it comes in vast heaving folds. Will it never end? The ship gives a slow, sullen roll to starboard as she feels the weight. Then the tail, a broad, flat-shaped mass, slips over the teak rail and falls with a loud slump onto the deck. For a few seconds, the hideous creature lies heaped in writhing, slimy coils. Then, with quick, darting movements, the monstrous head travels along the deck. Close by the mainmast stand the harness casks, and alongside of these, a freshly opened cask of salt beef with the top loosely replaced. The smell of the meat seems to attract the monster, and I can hear it sniffing with a vast, indrawing breath. Then those lips open, displaying 4 huge fangs. There is a quick forward motion of the head, a sudden crashing, crunching sound, and beef and barrel have disappeared. The noise brings one of the ordinary seamen out of the forecastle. Coming into the night, he can see nothing for a moment. Then, as he gets further aft, he sees, and with horrified cries rushes forward. Too late. From the mouth of the thing, there flashes forth a long, broad blade of glistening white, set with fierce teeth. I avert my eyes, but cannot shut out the sickening glut, glut that follows. The man on the lookout, attracted by the disturbance, has witnessed the tragedy and flies for refuge into the forecastle, flinging to the heavy iron door after him. The carpenter and sailmaker come running out from the half-deck in their drawers. Seeing the awful thing, they rush aft to the cabin with shouts of fear. The second mate, after one glance over the break of the poop, runs down the companionway with the helmsman after him. I can hear them barring the scuttle, and abruptly I realize that I am on the main deck alone. So far, I have forgotten my own danger. The past few minutes seem like a portion of an awful dream. Now, however, I comprehend my position, and shaking off the horror that has held me, turn to seek safety. As I do so, my eyes fall upon Jokey, lying huddled and senseless with fright where he has fallen. I cannot leave him there. Close by stands the empty half-deck, a little steel-built house with iron doors. The lee one is hooked open. Once inside, I am safe. Up to the present, the thing has seemed to be unconscious of my presence. Now, however, the huge barrel-like head sways in my direction. Then comes a muffled bellow, and the great tongue flickers in and out as the brute turns and swirls aft to meet me. I know there is not a moment to lose, and picking up the helpless lad, I make a run for the open door. It is only distant a few yards, but that awful shape is coming down the deck to me in great wreathing coils. I reach the house and tumble in with my burden, then out on deck again to unhook and close the door. Even as I do so, something white curls round the end of the house. With a bound, I am inside and the door is shut and bolted. Through the thick glass of the ports, I see the thing sweep round the house, in vain search for me. Jokey has not moved yet, so, kneeling down, I loosen his shirt collar and sprinkle some water from the breaker over his face. While I am doing this, I hear Morgan shout something. Then comes a great shriek of terror, and again that sickening glut, glut. Jokey stirs uneasily, rubs his eyes and sits up suddenly. Was that Morgan shouting? He breaks off with a cry. Where are we? I have had such awful dreams. At this instant, there is a sound of running footsteps on the deck, and I hear Morgan's voice at the door. Tom, open. He stops abruptly and gives an awful cry of despair. Then I hear him rush forward. Through the porthole, I see him spring into the fore-rigging and scramble madly aloft. Something steals up after him. It shows white in the moonlight. It wraps itself around his right ankle. Morgan stops dead, plucks out his sheath knife, and hacks fiercely at the fiendish thing. It lets go, and in a second, he is over the top and running for dear life up the topgallant rigging. A time of quietness follows, and presently I see that the day is breaking. Not a sound can be heard save the heavy, gasping breathing of the thing. As the sun rises higher, the creature stretches itself out along the deck and seems to enjoy the warmth. Still no sound, either from the men forward or the officers aft. I can only suppose that they are afraid of attracting its attention. Yet, a little later, I hear the report of a pistol away aft, and looking out, I see the serpent raise its huge head as though listening. As it does so, I get a good view of the forepart, and in the daylight, see what the night has hidden. There, right about the mouth, is a pair of little pig eyes that seem to twinkle with a diabolical intelligence. It is swaying its head slowly from side to side. Then, without warning, it turns quickly and looks right in through the port. I dodge out of sight, but not soon enough. It has seen me and brings its great mouth up against the glass. I hold my breath. My God, if it breaks the glass. I cower, horrified. From the direction of the port there comes a loud, harsh, scraping sound. I shiver. Then I remember that there are little iron doors to shut over the ports in bad weather. Without a moment's waste of time, I rise to my feet and slam to the door over the port. Then I go round to the others and do the same. We are now in darkness, and I tell Jokey in a whisper to light the lamp, which, after some fumbling, he does. About an hour before midnight I fall asleep. I am awakened suddenly some hours later by a scream of agony and the rattle of a water dipper. There is a slight scuffling sound, then that soul-revolting glut, glut. I guess what has happened. One of the men forward has slipped out of the forecastle to try and get a little water. Evidently, he has trusted to the darkness to hide his movements. Poor beggar. He has paid for his attempt with his life. After this I cannot sleep, though the rest of the night passes quietly enough. Towards morning I doze a bit, but wake every few minutes with a start. Jokey is sleeping peacefully. Indeed, he seems worn out with the terrible strain of the past 24 hours. About 8 a.m., I call him, and we make a light breakfast off the dry ship's biscuit and water. Of the latter, happily we have a good supply. Jokey seems more himself, and starts to talk a little, possibly somewhat louder than is safe, for as he chatters on, wondering how it will end, there comes a tremendous blow against the side of the house, making it ring again. After this, Jokey is very silent. As we sit there, I cannot but wonder what all the rest are doing, and how the poor beggars for'ard are faring, cooped up without water, as the tragedy of the night has proved. Towards noon, I hear a loud bang, followed by a terrific bellowing. Then comes a great smashing of woodwork and the cries of men in pain. Vainly, I ask myself what has happened. I begin to reason. By the sound of the report, it was evidently something much heavier than a rifle or pistol, and judging from the mad roaring of the thing, the shot must have done some execution. On thinking it over further, I become convinced that, by some means, those aft have got hold of the small signal cannon we carry, and though I know that some have been hurt, perhaps killed, yet a feeling of exultation seizes me as I listen to the roars of the thing and realize that it is badly wounded, perhaps mortally. Came aboard again. Have sent the second mate with 6 men to work her into port. Thompson is with us. He has ridden out his version of the affair. We certainly consider that the state of the ship, as we found her, bears out in every respect his story. It was a languid curiosity that first drew Stephen Jones into the strange, subterranean world of Rogers Museum. Tucked away on Southwark Street, it had a reputation for showcasing wax figures far more ghastly than anything at the famous Madame Tussauds. Jones, a connoisseur of the bizarre, strolled in one April afternoon, fully expecting to be disappointed. To his surprise, he was not. The place had the usual rogues gallery of historical gore. Landru, Dr. Crippen, victims of the guillotine, and fiends like Gilles de Rais. But beyond these commonplaces lay something else, something born of a uniquely diseased genius. Jones found himself captivated, staying until the closing bell forced him out. He learned that the museum's creator, George Rogers, was a former employee of Tussauds, dismissed amidst whispers about his sanity and his secretive, disturbing forms of worship. Rogers' passions were teratology and the iconography of nightmares. The true heart of his collection was hidden away in a special alcove marked Adults Only. It was this section that had thoroughly hooked Jones. Here were lumpish, hybrid monstrosities that seemed to crawl directly from a fever dream, all moulded with a devilish skill and coloured with a horrifyingly lifelike palette. Some were recognizable figures from myth, gorgons, chimeras, cyclops. Others were more obscure, nightmarish entities from forbidden tomes like the Necronomicon, the formless Black Tsatogwa, the tentacled Cthulhu, the elephantine Chogna Fawn. But the most terrifying creations were wholly original to Rogers, shapes so alien that no ancient legend had ever dared conceive of them. They were hideous parodies of earthly life or feverish visions from other galaxies, their sheer size and fiendish workmanship amplified by diabolically clever lighting. Intrigued, Jones sought out Rogers himself in the dingy workshop behind the main exhibit hall. The room was a crypt-like space, dimly lit by slit-like windows level with a hidden cobblestone courtyard. It was a charnel house of waxen parts. Limbs, heads and torsos lay scattered on benches. Shelves were piled high with matted wigs, glassy eyes, and predatory-looking teeth. In the centre of it all stood a large melting furnace for the wax. More unsettling were the isolated parts of unidentifiable creatures, and, at the far end of the room, a heavy plank door. It was secured with an enormous padlock, and painted above it was a peculiar symbol. Jones, who had once had a brief, terrifying glimpse into the Necronomicon, felt a cold shiver of recognition. This Rogers was a man of disconcertingly deep and dark scholarship. Rogers himself did not disappoint. He was a tall, lean man with large, combustive black eyes set in a pale, stubbled face. He welcomed Jones's intrusion, seemingly eager for an interested ear. His deep, resonant voice held a feverish intensity, and Jones could easily see why many thought him mad. As the weeks went by, Jones's visits became a habit, and Rogers grew more confidential. He hinted at strange faiths and bizarre practices, spinning extravagant tales of his travels to the most remote corners of the earth, Tibet, the Amazon, the Arabian desert, and of reading monstrous half-fabled books. One June evening, lubricated by a good bottle of whiskey Jones had brought, Rogers' talk took a truly demented turn. He began to boast of finding things in nature that no one had ever found before, of bringing back tangible proof. He claimed that the ancient books had guided him to places where survivals from cosmic cycles predating mankind still lingered. Jones was fascinated by the man's wild imagination, but Rogers's hints grew darker. He began to imply, heedless of ridicule, that not all the demonic abnormalities in his adults-only alcove were artificial. This was the breaking point. Jones's frank skepticism and amusement soured their growing cordiality. Rogers became morose and resentful, his sole purpose now seemingly to shatter Jones's wall of complacent disbelief. He would lead Jones to the most hideous figures, pointing out details that seemed to defy even the most masterful human craftsmanship. Jones, though he had lost the man's friendship, continued his visits, held by a grim fascination. The tension finally snapped in late September. Jones was wandering through the museum's dim corridors when a peculiar sound echoed from the direction of the workroom. It was the scream of a dog, a sound of such stark, anguished frenzy that it was appalling to hear. The attendants exchanged nervous glances. One of them, a dark, taciturn man named Orobona, who served as Rogers's primary assistant, offered a thin, sardonic smile that grated on Jones. When Jones moved toward the workroom door, Orobona stopped him. "Mr. Rogers was out," he said in his soft, accented voice, "and no one was allowed in during his absence." The scream? Undoubtedly some stray mongrels fighting in the courtyard behind the building. Unconvinced, Jones went outside to investigate. He found the courtyard, a dim, menacing space hemmed in by the ugly rear walls of the ancient buildings. There was no sign of a dog, no trace of the frantic turmoil he had heard. His eyes were drawn to the three small, grimy windows of the basement workroom. On an impulse, he knelt on the damp cobblestones and peered inside. The cellar was dark, but through the right-hand window, he saw a strange glow at the far end of the room. It was a vertical rectangle of light. He realized with a jolt that it was coming from the direction of the heavy, padlocked plank door. The door that was never opened. The door with the cryptic symbol. It had to be open now, with a light shining from whatever lay beyond. Jones waited until the near closing time and returned to the museum. The attendants were leaving, and he caught another sly, amused look from Orobona. He knocked on the workroom door. After a delay, it creaked open to reveal the feverish-eyed George Rogers. The showman was in a strange mood, a mixture of reluctance and gloating. His talk immediately veered into his usual wild boasts, surviving elder gods, nameless sacrifices, the living nature of his creations. But now his tone held a new, unnerving confidence. He kept glancing toward the padlocked inner door and toward a piece of burlap on the floor nearby, which seemed to conceal a small object. "Remember what I told you about the ruined city in Indochina?" Rogers shouted, his voice cracking with excitement. "Well, this is bigger." It all comes from a ritual in the Panacotic fragments. There were things in the north before mankind. It took us all the way to Alaska, but we found it. Cyclopean ruins. Orobona was with me. He knew enough of the Elder Lord to be properly afraid. Down in the 3rd level, we found the ivory throne the fragments spoke of, and it wasn't empty. The thing on the throne didn't move, he continued. We knew it needed the nourishment of sacrifice, but we wanted to get it to London first. We packed it in a large box and had some American prospectors help us haul it out. We told them it was archaeological stuff. Rogers produced a set of photographs. They showed ice-clad hills, men in furs, and vast tumbled ruins of a bizarre and alien architecture. One flashlight shot revealed an incredible interior chamber with a monstrously proportioned throne, carved with cryptic symbols, including the one now painted on his workshop door. We shipped the box to London, Rogers said, his face growing alarmingly repulsive. It was the first time we'd brought back something that might come alive. It's a god, and it needed sacrifice. The blood is the life, you know. I've been trying rites and sacrifices ever since. Orobona was always against it, the fool. He carries a pistol to protect himself. But I stuck to my plans, and last week the transition came. The sacrifice was received and enjoyed. Rogers licked his lips, then crossed the room to the piece of burlap. You've laughed enough at my work, he rasped. Orobona tells me you heard a dog screaming this afternoon. Do you know what that meant? He lifted the burlap. Beneath it lay a crushed, shapeless, and bloodless mass, what was left of a dog. Its hair was burned away as if by acid, its skin riddled with 1,000 circular punctures. It was a testament to a form of torture beyond human imagination. You damn madman, Jones cried, springing to his feet in pure loathing. Rogers faced him with a malignant sneer. Fool, do you think I did this? I gave the dog to it. What happened is its work, not mine. It needed nourishment, but let me show you what it looks like. He returned to his desk and handed Jones a photograph. The image was one of sheer, infernal genius. Squatting on a reproduction of the ivory throne was a thing for which no words existed. It had a globular torso, 6 sinuous limbs ending in crab-like claws, and a bubble-like head with a triangle of 3 fishy eyes and a long, flexible proboscis. Its body was covered not with fur, but with a dense growth of dark, slender tentacles, each tipped with a sucking mouth like the head of an asp. The creature's entire being radiated a blend of hate, greed, and cruelty that was utterly alien. Well, Rogers sneered. Now do you wonder what crushed the dog and sucked it dry with 1,000,000 mouths? It is a god, and I am his first priest. I, Shub Niggurath, the goat with 1,000 young. Rogers, this has to stop, Jones said, his voice shaking with disgust and pity. This is a great piece of art, but it's not good for you. Let Orobona destroy it. Let me tear up this picture. Idiot, Rogers snarled, snatching the photograph back. You still think it's a fraud? Damn you, you're going to know the truth. Not now, for it is resting, but later. Jones decided it was time to leave. I must be going now. I'll call around tomorrow. Afraid, are you? Rogers taunted. You say my effigies are only wax, yet you run away. Look here, do you dare to stay alone here in the dark? An idea struck Jones. It was a chance, perhaps, to shock Rogers back to some semblance of sanity. Suppose I do stay, he said conciliatorily. If I last until morning, will you agree to take a new view of things? Take a long vacation and let Orobona destroy that new thing of yours? A look of malign triumph crept over Rogers's face. Fair enough. If you stick it out, I'll take your advice. We'll go out, Then come back. I'll lock you in." As they left through the rear door, Rogers carried the burlap-wrapped bundle. In the center of the courtyard, he lifted a manhole cover and dropped his gruesome burden into the sewer below. They agreed to meet back at the museum at 11. Locked in the utter blackness of the vaulted cellar, Jones cursed his naivete. For the first half hour, he flashed his pocket light intermittently, but the morbid, grotesque objects it illuminated, a guillotine, a nameless hybrid, a face twisted in evil, soon became too much. He chose the darkness. He had agreed to this to help Rogers, a man of undeniable, if warped, genius. But the silence and solitude were oppressive. The chamber was like a tomb. Rogers had once boasted that no mice or insects ever came near the place, and it seemed to be true. The silence was absolute. Time dragged on with disconcerting slowness. The darkness sharpened his senses. He thought he could hear a faint, elusive susurrus, and the air felt unnaturally chilly. It tasted salty and carried a hint of an ineffable mustiness, like a natural history museum, not a collection of wax. The utter loneliness was frightful. He couldn't shake the image of the creature from the photograph, which he now knew must be behind that padlocked plank door in the workshop. As the hours wore on, the proximity of the wax figures began to prey on his nerves. In the total darkness, his imagination gave them a disturbing life. The guillotine seemed to creak. The face of Landru, the wife killer, seemed to sneer. He began to imagine the more monstrous figures from the adult-only alcove oozing and wriggling toward him. Black Tsatogwa reshaped itself into a sinuous horror. A rubbery night gaunt spread its leathery wings. To fight the phantoms of his own mind, he flashed his light on again. But this had its own drawbacks. He could have sworn he saw the canvas partition of the hellish alcove tremble furtively. He knew the horrors that lay beyond it. He imagined the iridescent globes of Yog-Sothoth floating toward him, the horn of the myth-thing Gnofke bulging against the canvas. He walked boldly toward the alcove, torch held steady, and saw that the long tentacles of the great Cthulhu figure were indeed swaying, set in motion by the draft of his own movement. He returned to his bench as a distant clock struck 1. The wait until morning seemed an eternity. Now his ears began to play tricks on him. He could swear he heard stealthy, plodding footsteps from the locked workroom beyond the door. It was pure imagination, he told himself, brought on by thinking of Rogers's unholy masterpiece. Then he imagined he heard a key turning in the lock, the slow, furtive creaking of the door opening. A shuffling sound was now audible, and it was advancing toward him. His resolution failed. "Who goes there?" he gulped. "What do you want?" There was no answer, only the relentless shuffling. The suspense was intolerable. He cried out again, "Halt! Who goes there?" as he switched on his torch. Paralyzed by what the beam revealed, he dropped the flashlight and screamed. Shuffling toward him was a gigantic, blasphemous black thing, not wholly ape, not wholly insect. Its loose hide hung on its frame, and its dead-eyed, rudimentary head swayed drunkenly. Its forepaws were extended, talons spread wide, its entire form taut with murderous intent. It leaped, and as darkness consumed him, Jones fainted. He came to almost immediately, being dragged apishly through the darkness. What fully woke him was the voice of the thing dragging him. It was human, and it was familiar. I, the voice howled. "I am coming, O Rantagoth, coming with the nourishment. You have waited long, but now you shall have what was promised. You shall crush and drain him, and grow strong." In an instant, the supernatural terror vanished, replaced by the chilling reality of his peril. This was no monster. It was the madman Rogers, dressed in a nightmare costume of his own design, about to offer Jones as a sacrifice. Realizing he was being dragged into the workroom, Jones gathered his strength. He made a sudden spring, breaking free and lunging for his captor's throat. The two were locked in a desperate, brutal struggle. Jones's athletic training was all that saved him from the savage, unrestrained attack of the madman. They rolled on the floor, crashing against benches and the furnace foundation. Rogers kicked, bit and clawed, all while spewing ritualistic jargon. Finally, a well-placed knee to Rogers's chest ended the fight. Jones had won. Exhausted, he stumbled through the dark room until he found a light switch. In the sudden glare, he bound the unconscious Rogers with whatever cords he could find. The creature costume was made of a strange, queer-smelling leather that made his flesh crawl. Finding Rogers's key ring, he changed into a less tattered set of clothes from a costume hook and prepared to leave to find help. He was about to open the door to the courtyard when a torrent of abuse told him Rogers had regained consciousness. "Fool," Rogers shrieked, his face a mask of fury, a long, deep scratch running down his left cheek from their struggle. "You would have been immortal. When it had had its fill, I would have taken your flattened fragments and preserved them in wax. The world would have marveled at how I could imagine such a thing. You still think my figures are only wax? Why not say preserved?" He writhed in his bonds. "Let me go. It is starving down there, beyond that door. If it dies, the old ones can never return. Let me go." Jones simply shook his head. Rogers, now squirming across the floor, began to beat his head thunderously against the padlocked plank door, letting out a series of frenetic, inhuman howls. The sheer volume was incredible. Then, suddenly, he stopped. He cocked his head as if listening intently, and a smile of devilish triumph spread across his face. "Listen, fool," he whispered hoarsely. "It has heard me. It is coming. Can't you hear it splashing in its tank?" The insane sincerity in that whisper was horribly contagious. Jones stared at the heavy plank door, and, to his utter terror, he now harbored a hallucination more vivid than any before. The madman was telling him to hear the splashing of a mythical monster, and God help him, he did hear it. Rogers cackled as he saw the mask of fear on Jones's face. "At last you believe. You hear it. Get my keys, fool. We must serve it." But Jones was paralyzed, his mind a storm of phantasmagoric images. There was a splashing. There was a shuffling of great wet paws. And from the cracks in the nightmare door, a noisome animal stench poured into the room. He thought he heard sniffing, then a sudden, baying, trumpeting noise. Something was fumbling at the door from the other side, patting and pawing at the planks. The thudding grew louder, a malign, determined pounding like a battering ram. There was an ominous cracking, a splintering, a surge of feta. A plank fell away, revealing a black paw ending in a crab-like claw. "Help! God help me! Ah!" His fear paralysis broke. In what felt like a single bound, he leaped across the crypt, yanked open the courtyard door, and fled in a frenzy of mindless terror, racing through the squalid streets of Southwark until memory failed him. A week later, nerve specialists allowed Jones to leave his bed. He had told them little, feeling that silence was his only recourse in the face of such madness. He scanned the newspapers, but found no mention of any disturbance at the museum. He began to question everything. Had the entire fight been a fever dream? A fortnight after that hideous night, he forced himself to return to Southwark Street. The museum was open, the attendants cheerful. Perhaps it had all been a dream. Then Orabona advanced to greet him, his dark face wearing a faint, sardonic smile. "Good morning, Mr. Jones," he said, a trace of an accent in his voice. "It has been some time. Did you wish to see Mr. Rogers? I'm sorry, but he is away. Business in America." It was very sudden. Jones mumbled a question about the day after his last visit. "Oh yes," Orabona said, clearly amused. "I remember it well. In the morning, I found the workroom in quite a mess. A great deal of cleaning up to do. There had been late work, you see. An important new specimen given its secondary baking process. Mr. Rogers came in, helped me complete it, and then left suddenly. There were important chemical reactions, loud noises. Some teamsters in the court fancied they heard pistol shots. A very amusing idea." He smiled again. "As for the new specimen, that is unfortunate. A masterpiece by Mr. Rogers. We put it on display, but there were faintings. Scotland Yard said it was too morbid to be shown. A tremendous shame. Of course, I didn't want to cause publicity for Mr. Rogers in his absence." A tide of repulsion rose in Jones, but Orabona continued. "You are a connoisseur, Mr. Jones. I am sure I violate no law in offering you a private view." Despite a powerful impulse to flee, Jones found himself being led by the arm toward the adults-only alcove. In the far corner, a large niche had been curtained off. "You must know," Orabona said smoothly. "The title of this specimen is The Sacrifice to Rantagoth." Jones started violently. "The shapeless god from obscure legends," Orabona went on, ignoring him. "Supposed to have come from outer space. It treated its sacrifices rather horribly, as you shall see. Mr. Rogers made it fiendishly lifelike, even the face of the victim." Trembling, Jones clung to the railing as Orabona began to draw the curtain aside. The foreigner smiled triumphantly. Behold, Jones reeled. There, fully 10 feet high, was the monstrosity from the photograph, shambling forward from a cyclopean ivory throne. In its claws, it held a crushed, flattened, bloodless thing that had once been human. The monster was just as the hellish print had depicted it, but the gigantic reality was 1,000 times more horrifying. The globular torso, the 3 fishy eyes, the proboscis, the capillation of asp-like suckers, the 6 limbs with their black crab-like claws. God, the sickening familiarity of that paw. Orabona's smile was utterly damnable. Jones stared, a morbid fascination forcing him to look closer. Something held him. It was the lolling head of the crushed waxen victim. The face was not entirely destroyed, and it was familiar. It was like the mad face of poor Rogers. Jones peered closer. It was natural for a mad egotist to use his own features, but was there something more? The detail on the mangled wax face was exquisite. The 1,000 punctures perfectly reproduced the wounds on that poor dog. But there was something else. On the victim's left cheek was an irregularity, as if the sculptor had tried to cover a defect in his original model. The more Jones looked at it, the more it horrified him. And then suddenly, he remembered. That night of hideousness, the tussle, the bound madman, and the long, deep scratch down the left cheek of the actual living Rogers. Jones released his desperate clutch on the railing and sank to the floor in a total faint. Orabona continued to smile.